Look, I don't know how else to put this. I just don't like Haman. He seems like a genuinely awful dude, and that's not just because of the genocide. Don't get me wrong, the genocide is a pretty big deal, and that is the primary reason I don't like him. But he's also a terrible right-hand man to King Xerxes, who admittedly, he's a little bit up and down himself. But Haman's the second most powerful person on earth. His job is to prop up the king and also to preserve the relationship between the throne and the citizenry. I mean, his subjects, if they're not taken care of, if the realm doesn't function, that'll be the end of the realm. And even in relatively oppressive governments throughout history, everybody still gets that. There's only so much you can do to the citizenry before it breaks. People will cease to consent to be governed if you're not just, if you don't take care of them. I mean, they pay taxes, and people who pay taxes eventually will be like, I think we should get something for that. So a second reason I don't like Haman is that he abuses his position. He's not any good at it. He's willing to create an outgroup and then kill them in order to achieve his own goals. He's unjustly weaponizing his power, his access to the throne, his access to the sword for his own personal grudges. And that is the height of despotic nonsense. Punishing people you don't like, using a farce of the force of law. But tin pot dictators and corrupt members of the court and dirty politicians have abused their power when they have their hands on it to punish the opposition since forever. I mean, this is an ancient playbook. You can't be surprised when politicians do that. It would actually take remarkable restraint to keep from doing that. So I'm not very impressed with Haman for that reason either. But if you really think about it, through 5 chapters, we're getting up into the beginning of chapter 5, we haven't really spent a lot of time with Haman. We just more know him by what he's done than by what he thinks and how he's wired and who he really is. We learn something about each character and the role they're going to play in the story, of course, when they get introduced. So this is what happened during the time of Xerxes. Well, who's that? Well, he's the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. And so the important details that the author of Esther wants us to know about Xerxes is that he is a very, very, very powerful king. Right off the bat, we learn about Vashti, that she knows how to give a banquet. So she's a woman who can lead things, and also that she is very beautiful. That tells us about the role she is going to play in the story. Then we get a little bit further along, and we learn that there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So same deal with Mordecai. Right off the bat, the first stuff we learned about him tells us about where he's positioned in the story. And then a few verses later in chapter 2, same thing with Esther or Hadassah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features. So there we learn about her positioning in the story and her important trait that will come into play. I understand that might offend modern sensibilities that she's not a girl boss, but the reality is that her beauty, which is more than just physical appearance, it's also social sophistication in this context, really in any context, beauty includes social sophistication. That is what's going to position her in the story to play the role she's going to play. So then when we meet Haman at the beginning of chapter 3, he gets described as son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and then shortly thereafter gets described, if Agagite wasn't laying it on thick enough, as a reference back to the Amalekites, the age-old blood enemy of the Jews, then just the phrase, the enemy of the Jews, gets tagged on to Haman as his noble title, almost in a sense, a little bit later on in Esther chapter 3. So we know what we're getting with all of these characters as they're introduced. What is Haman's role? Who is he truly? Well, Esther is a lovely orphan. Mordecai is a Jew who understands the pain of exile. Xerxes is a great and powerful king, and Haman is an Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. But now the author of Esther is drilling down further in his character, and we realize he's also small, impotent, and insecure. He's one of these guys who, it doesn't matter how much he achieves, if there's nobody there to heap praises on him and tell him how great he is and how important these achievements are and to drop superlatives, you're the best, the most awesomest, this is the greatest achievement in the history of all the achievements. If that isn't happening, it doesn't mean anything to him, and he's terribly hollow and empty inside. He's one of these people who needs everybody to play along with his fantasies and his imaginations of self-importance and grandeur, or else it isn't real. If anybody isn't participating in the story, it isn't real. And that's why he freaks out over Mordecai's refusal to play ball. Is it anti-Semitism? Yeah, sure. But it's anti-Semitism coupled with massive insecurity, and it just so happens that it's the convictions, whatever those convictions might be, of a Jew that results in one person who won't stand up and give the salute, who won't participate in this sham about Haman's awesomeness. That's all it takes to send him into a self-destructive tizzy. And so in Esther chapter 5, when Esther shows up in her royal robes and the king receives her and is like, I'm going to give you whatever you want. I've missed you. Also, you look great. And Esther's like, I just want a banquet with you and Haman. Haman's like, yeah, awesome. That is another trophy. That is another achievement for me. And then at the banquet, when the king's like, all right, well, same deal, up to half the kingdom. What do you want, lovely? And Esther's like, I want another banquet with you and Haman. Haman's like, all the awesomer. Giant W for the Hammeister. And then he goes out that day happy and in high spirits, is verse 9 of Esther 5. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. So very fragile. He had an amazing day. He's the second most powerful person in the entire world, and one guy won't play along with his thing. And Haman so desperately needs Mordecai's approval that he's going to forget all of his great achievements and all of the honors that have been heaped upon him just here even in the last 24 hours. And he's going to obsess and stew about how there is one guy somewhere out there who doesn't see Haman as awesome as Haman imagines Haman to be. So, calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him and how he had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. This, to me, is what I refer to as an Applebee's conversation. This is where somebody said something at work or in the teacher's lounge or at church or on the team, and I am mad. And we're going to go to Applebee's, and we are not going to sit in a booth. We're going to sit at a high top table, not at the bar, because then other people might interact with us. And I want you to focus on listening to my story about how I was slighted, and there will be 64-ounce margaritas to help make the story go down better. And you will nod and listen and agree with me that that other person is wrong and bad, and you will prop me up, or else the next Applebee's conversation might be about you. This episode not brought to you by Applebee's, obviously. So this party is all about putting salve on his wounded ego, because in the grand scales, the balance in his brain, all of the stuff like being the second most powerful man in the world and getting to just kill an entire people group, having that kind of power because somebody offended you one time, and getting invited to the fanciest banquets and having all the money and food and having your own armed guards and all of this other stuff, that somehow is outweighed by a guy at the gate with no official title being like, I don't think you're all that special. After you already declared that you were going to genocide his people. What did you expect him to do? Be like, I was totally wrong about you. You actually are pretty super. You're genociding his people. Just give it a few months, and he'll be dead. Weirdo. But no, the insecurity is so thick with this guy that he has to pull together this entire party just to recharge his ego batteries. This episode now brought to you by Ego Lawn Supplies. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she invited me along with the king tomorrow. And then I imagine he takes a real big, long swig from his 64-ounce salt-encrusted margarita cup and looks wistfully at the flare that adorns the walls of this metaphorical ancient Applebee's and says, but all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. I told you at the beginning of the episode, I don't like Haman very much. And in the course of our 10 or 12 minutes of conversation here, I haven't been able to talk myself into liking him more. I think he's a really bad dude. I think it's actually worse that he's going to carry out this tremendous evil just because of some petty personal slight. You mean to tell me that all of this could have been avoided if this guy, who maybe just didn't like Jews very much, just had thicker skin, was like, okay, I don't like Jews very much, I don't like that guy very much, but even if I am a huge racist and a pretty bad dude, still, like you can't genocide an entire people just because one guy won't salute you. I mean, if he even had a modicum of personal sense of self and security and satisfaction just from who he is and what he's achieved, if his insecurity was even dialed down to like a 7 or a 6, this whole thing could have been avoided. And I love the way the author of Esther is pulling back the curtain here on the tremendous weakness of his character, the neediness of his character, and all of these great things in his life, having a wife, having 10 sons, having all of this money, having all of this power, having all of these friends will show up in a moment's notice to come and tell you you're awesome. All of that can't outweigh a guy by a gate won't get excited about you after you already declared that you're going to commit genocide against him and his people. Dude, you're just weak. It seems like you're strong. It seems like you're powerful, but this is it's clinical dictionary definition, epitome of what weakness looks like. And it's one thing to be weak. It's another thing to be weak and petty. And it's one thing to be weak and petty, but it's another thing to be weak and petty and endlessly bloodthirsty. And that's what we're getting out of this guy. Now, I think there are a couple of interesting echoes here in this passage from other parts of the Old Testament. And tomorrow we're going to look at that. We're going to look at who this Zeresh lady is a little bit more. Maybe she'll try to calm him down. Maybe she'll try to ramp him up, Lady Macbeth style. We're fixing to find out. But for today, I think that's plenty. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast exists because many of you kick in to make it happen, even though you don't have to. Learn more at thetmbh.com/support.